Tonight we're looking at the results of a class in which the students have been studying Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest from both an academic and a performance point of view. In the course of the evening, you'll see 8 students performing a number of scenes from the play. All of the students will portray more than one character, and the order in which you see the scenes is not necessarily the order in which they come in the play, so my job is to make sure you have the information you need in order to understand what we're trying to do. The first scene you'll see is from the first scene in the play, in which a Mr. Ernest Worthing wishes to propose to a woman named Gwendolyn, and Gwendolyn's cousin, Algernon Moncrief, is threatening to prevent him from doing so. The scene contains the seeds of several themes which are developed throughout the text, and among these thematic issues are such things as sex roles and role models, the class system, and the social and economic concerns of the 19th century British gentry. In spite of the light and whimsical nature of the play, Wilde is clearly dealing with some consequential matters. But a number of other things are discussed in the play too, and these ultimately assume a greater degree of prominence. These include questions of personal happiness and public duty, and the problems which arise when these two come into conflict. Wilde is also examining the difference between the private persona and the public person, and the obstacles to happiness which are created when one must sacrifice personal identity for the sake of public approval. It's risky to attempt to read creative work in terms of biography, but it's interesting that Wilde's 2 most famous works, The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, both deal with this division between the public and the private self. It is also interesting that although Ernest maintains a consistently hopeful and cheerful tone, it was written during a period of great personal stress, and it opened in London to great acclaim only a matter of weeks before Wilde was arrested for committing acts of gross indecency with other male persons. With Wilde's arrest, the play closed because respectable people did not want to be seen coming into or going out of the theater. In fact, a number of years would have passed before anyone even dared to publish the play. Wilde had been publicly branded as a pariah, and his play was regarded as something which one simply should not read.
It's absurd to have a hard and fast rule about what one should and what one should not read. More than half of modern culture depends on what one should not read.
I'm quite aware of the fact, and I don't propose to discuss modern culture. It isn't the sort of thing one should talk of in private. I simply want my cigarette case back.
Yes, but this isn't your cigarette case. This cigarette case is a present from someone by the name of Cecily, and you said you didn't know anyone of that name.
Well, if you want to know, Cecily happens to be my aunt.
Your aunt?
Yes, charming old lady she is too. Lives at Temper 12. Just give it back to me.
Yes, but why does your aunt call herself Little? See, it says, from little Cecily with her fondest love.
My dear fellow, what on earth is there in that? Some men so tall, some men so not so tall. That is a matter that surely an aunt may be allowed to decide for herself. You seem to think that every aunt should be exactly like your aunt. That is absurd. I would say give you back my cigarette.
Yes, but why does your aunt call herself... Why does your aunt call you her uncle? See, it says, from little Cecily, with her fondest love to her dear Uncle Jack. There's no objection, I admit, to an aunt being a small aunt. But why an aunt, no matter what her size may be, will call her own nephew her uncle? I can't quite make it out. Besides, your name isn't Jack at all. It is Ernest.
It isn't Ernest, it's Jack.
You have always told me it was Ernest. I've introduced you to everyone as Ernest. In fact, you look as though your name was Ernest. I would even go so far as to say as you are the most earnest-looking person I ever saw. Perfectly absurd you saying your name isn't Ernest. Look, it's right here on your cards. Mr. Ernest Worthing, B for the Albany. I'll keep this as proof your name is Ernest if ever you attempt to deny it to me, or to Gwendolyn, or to anyone else.
Well, if you want to know, my name is Ernest in town and Jack in the country, and the cigarette case was given to me in the country.
Yes, but that does not account for the fact that your small aunt, Cecily, who lives at Tunbridge Wells, calls you her dear uncle. Come, old boy, you'd much better have the thing out at...
My dear Algy, you talk exactly as if you were a dentist. It is very vulgar to talk like a dentist when one isn't a dentist. It produces a false impression.
That is what dentists always do. Now go on, tell me the whole thing. I might add, I've always suspected you to be a confirmed and secret Bunburyist. I'm quite sure of it now.
Bunbury? What on earth do you mean by Bunbury?
I'll reveal to you the meaning of that incomparable expression just as soon as you are kind enough to inform me why you are Ernest in town and Jack in the country.
I'll produce my cigarette case first.
Here it is. Now, produce your explanation and pray make it improbable.
There is nothing improbable about my explanation at all. In fact, it's quite ordinary. Old Mr. Thomas Carter, who adopted me when I was a little boy, made me in his will guardian to his granddaughter, Cecily Carter. Cecily, who addresses me as her uncle from motives of respect that you could not possibly appreciate, resides at my place in the country and is charged for admirable governess.
Well, where's that place in the country, by the way?
Oh, that is nothing to you, dear boy. You're not going to be invited. I may tell you candidly that the place is not in Shropshire.
I suspected that, my dear fellow, for I Bunbury all over Shropshire on 2 separate occasions. Now go on. Why are you Ernest in town and Jack in the country?
I doubt you'll be able to understand my real motive. You're hardly serious enough. When one is placed in the position of a guardian, one has to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. It's one's duty to do so. And as a high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness. In order to get up to town, I've always pretended to have a young brother with the name of Ernest, who lives at the Albany and gets into the most dreadful scrapes. That is the whole truth, pure and simple.
Truth is rarely pure, and never simple. Modern life would be very tedious if it were either, and modern literature would be a complete impossibility.
That wouldn't be at all a bad thing.
Literary criticism is not your forte, my dear fellow. Don't try it. You should leave that to people who haven't attended a university. They do it so well in the daily papers. What you really are is a Bunburyist. I was quite right in saying you were Bunburyist. In fact, Jack, or Ernest, whatever your name is, you are one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know.
What on earth do you mean?
You have invented a very useful younger brother by the name of Ernest so that you may travel up to town as often as you like. I have created an invaluable permanent invalid named Bunbury so that I may go down into the country as often as I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it were not for Bunbury's extraordinarily bad health, for instance, I wouldn't be able to dine with you Willis's tonight, for I've really been engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week.
I've not asked you to dine with me anywhere tonight.
I know. You're absurdly careless about handing out invitations. That is so foolish of you. Nothing annoys people more than not receiving an invitation.
You had much better dine with your Aunt Augusta.
I haven't the slightest intention of doing anything of the kind. To begin with, I dine there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough to dine with one's own relations. Secondly, if I do dine there, I will be treated just as a member of the family. I will either be set next to no women or 2. Thirdly, I know who she will sit me next to. She will sit me next to Mary Farquhar, who sits beside me, of course, with her own husband across the table. That's not very pleasant. Indeed, it's not even decent. And that sort of thing is tremendously on the increase. It looks so bad. It's simply like washing one's own clean linen in public. But now that I know you to be a confirmed and secret Bunburyist, I naturally want to say your rules.
I'm not a Bunburyist at all. Gwendolyn accepts me. I'm going to kill my brother. Indeed, I think I'll kill him in any case. Cecily is a little too much interested in him. It is rather a bore, so I'm going to get rid of him. And I strongly advise you to do the same with your invalid friend as an absurd name.
Nothing will induce me to part with Bunbury. And if you ever do get married, it seems to me extremely problematical. You will be very good for knowing Bunbury. A man who marries without Bunbury has a very tedious time of it.
That is nonsense. If I marry a charming girl like Gwendolyn, and she's the only girl that I ever met that I would marry, I certainly won't come to know Bunbury.
Then your wife will. You hardly seem to realize, my friend, that in married life, 3 is company, and 2 is none.
That is a theory that the corrupt French drama has been propounding for the last 50 years.
Yes, and that the happy English home is proved in half the time.
Don't be cynical. It's perfectly easy to be cynical.
It isn't perfectly easy to be anything nowadays. Such a lot of beastly competition. Ah, it must be Aunt Augusta. Only relatives, or creditors, ever ringing that Windermere, man. Now, if I were to get her out of the way for, say, 10 minutes, so that you might have an opportunity to propose to Gwendolyn, might I dine with you at Willis's tonight?
I suppose so, if you want to.
Yes, but do be serious about it. I hate people who are not serious about meals. It's so shallow.
Jack proposes to Gwendolyn, and Gwendolyn accepts. However, an obstacle to their happiness makes itself felt almost immediately. For Gwendolyn, who is still under the impression that her fiancé's name is Ernest, says, "We live, as I hope you know, Mr. Worthing, in an age of ideals, and my ideal has always been to love someone of the name of Ernest. The moment Algernon first mentioned to me that he had a friend named Ernest, I knew I was destined to love you." Jack is understandably disconcerted. After all, the name Ernest was just the excuse he used to do what Algernon would call bunburying. Jack asks if Gwendolyn couldn't love him if he had another name, but Gwendolyn dismisses the idea. She says, "Ernest is a divine name. It has music. It produces vibrations." Jack is then forced into a private interview with Gwendolyn's mother, Lady Bracknell. Lady Bracknell questions Jack about his income, politics, and personal habits, and he passes the examination with flying colors. However, when she asks about minor matters, such as whether his parents are alive or dead, Jack admits that he has no idea, for he is a foundling adopted by a benefactor after being discovered in a handbag left in the cloakroom of Victoria Station. Horrified, Lady Bracknell forbids the marriage, saying that she will never allow Gwendolyn to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a parcel. And she ends by telling Jack that if he wishes to marry Gwendolyn, he must produce at least one parent of either sex before the season is quite over. Jack must now find parents who have been lost to him for nearly 30 years, and he must also find a way to be rechristened with the name of Ernest. Algernon, in the meantime, discovers the location of Jack's country house and secretly goes to investigate the charms of Cecily Cardew. When he finds her, he introduces himself to her as Jack's younger brother, Ernest, and then discovers that she has long cherished fantasies of the unseen wicked younger brother. She seems disappointed when he tries to tell her that he is not as wicked as Jack has made him out to be. Cecily says, "I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked and really being good all the time. That would be hypocrisy." So Algernon assures her that he has been very bad in his own small way, and she says, "I don't think you should be so proud of that, though I am sure it must have been very pleasant." Cecily and Algernon fall in love and become engaged. As soon as they do, Cecily also confesses that it has always been a girlish dream of mine to love someone whose name was Ernest. There is something in that name that seems to inspire absolute confidence. I pity any poor married woman whose husband is not called Ernest. Clearly, Gwendolyn and Cecily love the name Ernest because it sounds so earnest. But what anyone in the play means by the word is very paradoxical. For example, Jack adopts the name to try and escape the country and the stifling restrictions that exist when it is one's duty to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. That is to say, he adopts the name in order to escape the restrictions of being an earnest person. And although Jack's life in London would seem to be anything but earnest, Gwendolyn apparently loves him because she believes he is as earnest as his name. Cecily, like Gwendolyn, feels the name Ernest is one that inspires confidence, but it is clear that it is Ernest's wickedness, not his earnestness, that she finds attractive. Algernon is neither Ernest Worthing nor apparently a very earnest person, yet he is not at all disturbed by Cecily's preconceptions of him, nor does he hesitate to adopt any post her fantasies indicate that he should. The relations between names and individuals, and between the public persona and the private self, all suggest that we do not control our own lives so much as we are created by other people's expectations. If Algernon is neither Ernest Worthing nor an earnest person, and if Cecily loves him because she believes he is one but not the other, then where exactly does that leave him? And though Jack wishes to be Ernest in town and Jack in the country, he would seem to be much more earnest as Jack than he is when he is Ernest. If you're confused, then consider how Cecily and Gwendolyn will feel when they meet and discuss the importance of loving Ernest.
Cecily Cardew, what a very sweet name. Somebody tells me we're going to be great friends. I like you already more than I can say. My first impressions of people are never wrong.
How nice of you to like me so much after we have known each other for such a comparatively short time. Pray, sit down.
I may call you Cecily. May I not?
With pleasure.
And you will always call me Gwendolyn, won't you? If you wish. Then it is all quite settled, is it not?
I hope so.
Perhaps this might be a favorable opportunity for my mentioning who I am. My father is Lord Bracknell. You have never heard of Papa, I suppose?
I don't think so.
Outside the family circle, Papa, I'm glad to say, is entirely unknown. I think that is quite as it should be. The home seems to me to be the proper sphere for the man. And certainly once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate, does he not? And I don't like that. It makes men so very attractive. Cecily, Mama, whose views on education are remarkably strict, has brought me up to be extremely short-sighted. It is part of her system. So do you mind if I look at you a little more clearly?
Oh, not at all, Gwendolyn. I am very fond of being with that.
You are here on a short visit, I suppose?
Oh, no. I live here.
Really? Your mother, no doubt, or some female relative of advanced years resides here also?
No, I have no mother, nor in fact any relations.
Indeed.
My dear guardian, with the assistance of Miss Prism, has the arduous task of looking after me.
Your guardian?
Yes, I am Mr. Worthing's ward.
Oh. It is strange. He never mentioned to me he had a ward. How secretive of him. He grows more interesting hourly. I'm not sure, however, that the news inspires me with feelings of unmixed delight. I'm very fond of you, Cecily. I've liked you ever since I met you. But I'm bound to state that now that I know that you are Mr. Worthing's ward, I cannot help expressing a wish that you were, well, just a little older than you seem to be, and not quite so very alluring in appearance. In fact, if I may speak candidly,
Pray do. I think that whenever one has anything unpleasant to say, one should always be quite candid.
well, to speak with perfect candor, Cecily, I wish you were fully 42 and more than usually plain for your age. Ernest has a strong, upright nature. He's the very soul of truth and honor. Disloyalty would be as impossible to him as deception. But even men of the noblest possible moral characters are extremely susceptible to the influences of the physical charms of others. Modern, no less than ancient history supplies us with many most painful examples of what I refer to. If it were not so, indeed history would be quite unreadable.
I beg your pardon, Gwendolyn. Did you say Ernest?
Yes.
Oh, but it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is my guardian. It is his brother, his elder brother.
Ernest never mentioned to me he had a brother.
I'm sorry to say they have not been on good terms for a long time.
Ah, that accounts for it. Now that I think of it, I can't ever remember any man mentioning his brother. The subject seems distasteful to most men. Cecily, you have lifted a load from my mind. I was growing almost anxious. It would have been terrible if any cloud had come across a friendship like ours, would it not? Of course, you are quite sure that it is not Mr. Ernest Worthing who is your guardian.
Quite sure. In fact, I am going to be his.
I beg your pardon.
Dearest Gwendolyn, there is no reason why I should make it a secret to you. Our county newspaper is sure to chronicle the fact next week. Mr. Ernest Worthing and I are engaged to be married.
My darling Cecily, there must be some slight error, for Mr. Ernest Worthing is engaged to me. The announcement will appear in the Morning Post on Saturday at the latest.
I'm afraid you must be under some misconception. You see, Ernest proposed to me exactly 10 minutes ago.
It is certainly very curious, for he asked me to be his wife yesterday afternoon at 5:30. If you care to verify the incident, pray do so. I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read in the train. I'm so sorry if it's any disappointment to you, dear Cecily, but I'm afraid I have the prior claim.
It would distress me more than I can tell you, dear Gwendolyn, if it is crushing any mental or physical anguish, but I feel bound to point out that since Ernest proposed to you, he clearly has changed his mind.
If the poor boy has been entrapped into any foolish promise, I shall consider it my duty to rescue him at once, and with a firm hand.
Whatever unfortunate entanglement my dear boy may have got into, I will never reproach him with it after we are married.
Do you allude to me, Miss Cardew, as an entanglement? You are presumptuous. On an occasion of this kind, it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure.
Do you suggest, Miss Fairfax, that I entrapped Ernest into an engagement? How dare you? This is no time for wearing the shallow mask of manners. When I see a spade, I call it a spade.
I am glad to say I've never seen a spade. It is obvious our social spheres have been widely different.
Continues, and you'll see more of it later. It ends when Jack and Algy both appear on the scene and their true identities are revealed. After all, Jack cannot go on pretending to be Ernest in front of Cecily, and Algy cannot pretend to be Ernest in front of cousin Gwendolyn. When the women find out the true identities of their fiancés, they immediately break off their engagements, declaring that if they are not engaged to somebody named Ernest, then they are not engaged to anyone at all. The importance of being earnest is sometimes said to look forward to the theater of the absurd, and an absurdist tendency is certainly evident in this episode. Cecily and Gwendolyn neither consider the fact that their entire courtships have been conducted under false pretenses, nor do they consider the fact that the men they love are still the same human beings, no matter what they are called. It is not the person, but the name he bears that is important. A rose by any other name clearly would not smell as sweet. This idea of form being more important than content is echoed throughout the play, such as when Cecily says, "In matters of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing." Or when Lady Bracknell says of her nephew, "Algernon is an extremely, I may almost say ostentatiously eligible young man. He has nothing, but he looks everything. What more can one desire?" In this wilderness of uncertainty, where one's identity depends on how one is perceived or on what one is called at a particular moment, Lady Bracknell's objection to Jack's lack of family comes to seem less arbitrary and unfair. Family becomes the one signpost which has any hope of remaining constant, for when one's identity is not individually determined, but socially determined, a network of family relations provides the only hope one has for stability. After all, it is a far easier matter to change or receive a new name than it is to change or receive new parents. When Jack and Algy reveal their plans to be rechristened as Ernest, they are forgiven by Cecily and Gwendolyn, and all engagements are immediately resumed. At this inopportune moment, Lady Bracknell arrives, and we will now see her reaction to Jack's news that he and Gwendolyn are still planning to be married.
Come here. Sit down. Sit down immediately. Agitation of any kind is a sign of mental decay in the young and of physical weakness in the old. Apprised, sir, of my daughter's sudden flight for her trusty maid, whose confidence I purchased by means of a small pillet. I followed her at once by a luggage train. Her unhappy father is, I am glad to say, under the impression that she is attending a more than usually lengthy lecture by the University Extension Scheme on the influence of a permanent income on thought. I do not propose to undeceive him. Indeed, I have never undeceived him on any question.
I would consider it wrong. But of course, you will clearly understand that all communication between yourself and my daughter must cease immediately from this moment. On this point, as indeed on all points, I am firm.
In public and being something else in private. And one of those problems is that any mask, no matter how ingeniously contrived, is apt to fall off. And even when the people wearing the masks believe that their disguise is ingenious, it is ultimately not their judgment, but the judgment of their audience which will count. This idea is demonstrated in the following scene, which takes place early in the second act. Cecily has not yet met Algernon, let alone become engaged to him, and her entire knowledge of the non-existent Ernest Worthing consists of the stories Jack has chosen to fabricate about him. With Cecily in this scene are her governess, Miss Prism, and the local vicar, Reverend Canon Chasuble, two people who ardently desire to present an earnest face to the world, although, for a change, neither of them is claiming to be named Ernest.
Cecily! Surely such utilitarian occupation as watering flowers is rather good to the duty, senor, especially at a moment when intellectual pleasures await you. Your German grammar is on the table. Pray, open it to page 15. We will repeat yesterday's lesson. But I don't like German. It isn't at all a becoming language. I know perfectly well that I look quite plain after my German lesson. Child, you know how anxious your guardian is that you should improve yourself in every way. He laid particular stress on your German as he was leaving for town yesterday. Indeed, he always lays stress on your German when he is leaving for town.
Dear Uncle Jack is so very serious. Sometimes he is so serious that I think he cannot speak quite well.
Your guardian enjoys the best of health, and his gravity of demeanor is especially to be commended in one so comparatively young as he is. I know no one who has a higher sense of duty and responsibility.
I suppose that is why he often looks a little bored when we three are together.
Cecily, I am surprised at you. Mr. Worthing has many troubles in his life. Idle merriment and triviality would be out of place in his conversation. You must remember his constant anxiety about that unfortunate young man, his brother.
I wish Uncle Jack would allow that unfortunate young man, his brother, to come down here sometime. We might have a good influence over him, Miss Prism. I knew you certainly would. You know German and geology and things of that kind influence a man very much.
I do not think that even I could have any influence over a character that, according to his own brother's admission, is irretrievably fascinated. Indeed, I am not certain that I would desire to reclaim him. I am not in favor of this modern mania for turning bad people into good people at a moment's notice. As a man, so let him read. You really must put away your diary, Cecily. I don't see why you should keep a diary at all.
I keep a diary in order to enter other wonderful secrets of my life. If I didn't write them down, I should probably forget all about them.
Memory, my dear Cecily, is the diary that we all carry about with us.
Yes, but it usually chronicles the things that have never happened. It couldn't possibly have happened. I believe that memory is responsible for nearly all the 3-volume novels at the Lindsay Library System.
Do not speak slightingly of the 3-volume novel, Cecily. I wrote one myself in earlier days.
Did you really, Miss Prism? How wonderfully clever you are. I hope it did not end happily. I don't like novels that end happily. They depress me so much.
What? Ended happily, and the bad, unhappily. That is what fiction means.
I suppose so. But it seems very unfair. And was your novel ever published?
Alas, no. The manuscript, unfortunately, was abandoned. I use the word instead of lost or mislaid. To your work, child. These speculations are profitless.
Ah, but I see dear Dr. Chasuble coming up for the garden.
Dr. Chasuble, this is indeed a pleasure.
And how are we this morning? Miss Prism, you are as well?
Miss Prism has just been complaining of a slight headache.
I think it would do her so much good
To have a short stroll with you in the park, Dr. Chasuble.
Cecily, I have not mentioned anything about a headache.
No, dear Miss Prism, I know that.
Cecil, you are not inattentive.
Oh, I am afraid I am.
That is strange. Were I fortunate enough to be Miss Prism's pupil, I would hang upon her lips. I spoke metaphorically, of course. My metaphor was drawn from bees. Mr. Worthing, I suppose, is not yet returned from town.
We do not expect him until Monday afternoon.
Ah, yes. He usually likes to spend his Sunday in London. He is not one of those whose sole aim is enjoyment, as by all accounts that unfortunate young man his brother seems to be. But I must not disturb Egeria, her pupil, any longer.
Egeria, my name is Letitia, Doctor.
Ah, classical illusionary, drawn from the pagan author. But I shall see you both undoubtedly tomorrow.
I think, dear Doctor, I will have a stroll with you. I find I have a headache after all, and it won't like to be good.
With pleasure, Mrs. Prism. With pleasure. We might go as far as the school tonight.
That would be delightful. Cecily, you will read your political economy in my absence. The chapter on the fall of the rupee, Raymond, it is somewhat too sensational. Even these metallic problems have their melodramatic side.
Horrid political economy. Horrid geography. Horrid German.
So vulnerable, but we must keep in mind what a temptation this prism represents. However, even when Chasuble is most composed, he is still a rather transparent figure. And in fact, in many ways, his earnestness is more of a pose than Jack's or Algernon's claims to be earnest. For if we have a tendency to associate the word earnest with such things as adopting a serious moral tone on all subjects, a look at the definition of the word as it appears in the dictionary indicates that earnest means showing deep sincerity of feeling, or it can mean performing an action with a purposeful or serious intent. The next monologue is from a portion in the play where Jack has just arrived at his country home. Unbeknownst to Jack, Algernon, in the guise of Ernest, is at that very moment courting Cecily. That admittedly awkward situation is compounded because Jack has decided to make good his promise to get rid of his fictitious brother, and he has just announced to Reverend Chasuble that Ernest Worthing has died in Paris of a severe chill. We will now see Reverend Chasuble's earnest reaction to such grave news.
The interment will take place in Paris. In Paris? I fear that hardly points to any very serious state of mind at the last. You would no doubt wish me to make some slight allusion to this tragic domestic affliction. Next Sunday, my sermon on the meaning of the man in the wilderness can be adapted to almost any occasion, joyful, or as in this case, distressing. I have preached it in confirmations, christenings, days of celebration, days of humiliation, and festal days. The last time I delivered it was in the cathedral, as a charity sermon on behalf of the Society for the Prevention of Discontent among the Upper Orders. The bishop, who was there, was much struck by some of the analogies I drew. But now, dear Mr. Worthing, I no longer wish to intrude into a house of sorrow. I merely beg you not to be too much bowed down by grief. What seem to us as bitter trials are often blessings in disguise.
Miss Prism is, in public, at any rate, anxious to present a facade of learnedness, uprightness, and responsibility. In her case, however, it is not difficult to see her desire to present an earnest face to the world as being an attempt to repent for a moment of weakness in her past, one which fortunately provides the resolution of the conflict. In the scene you are about to see, Lady Bracknell confronts Miss Prism with the blot on her past, and Miss Prism confesses the greatest error she ever committed.
Oh, Prism! Come here, Prism. Prism, So, Prism, you left Lord Bracknell's house, number 104, Upper Grosvenor Street, in charge of a perambulator that contained the baby of the male sex. You never returned. A few weeks later, through the elaborate investigations of the Metropolitan Police, the perambulator was discovered at midnight, standing by itself in a remote corner of Bayswater. It contains the manuscript of a 3-volume novel of more than usually revolting sentimentality. But the baby was not there. Prism, where is that baby?
Lady Bracknell, I admit with some shame that I do not know. I only wish I did. The plain facts of the case are these. On the morning of the day you mentioned, a day that is forever branded in my memory, I prepared, as usual, to take the baby out in its perambulator. I also had with me a old but somewhat capacious handbag in which I intended to place the manuscript of a work of fiction that I had written in my few unoccupied hours. In a moment of mental abstraction, before which I can never forgive myself, I deposited the manuscript in the bassinet and the baby in the handbag. I left the handbag at one of the larger railway stations in London.
Prism?
Marriage are destroyed as she discovers that Jack's family is in fact her own. Jack discovers that he is Gwendolyn's cousin and Algernon's older brother, and that he was named after his father, Lady Bracknell's brother-in-law, Ernest John Moncrief. The traditional performance text of The Importance of Being Earnest is derived from the 3-act script first performed by George Alexander's acting company at the St. James Theatre in London in 1895. However, few people realize that the script performed at the St. James is not the script that Wilde wrote. The manuscript that he gave to George Alexander was for a 4-act play. During the rehearsal process, from which Wilde was excluded, some fairly drastic revisions took place. In fact, after the play's premiere, Wilde went backstage to greet Alexander and said, "It was charming, perfectly charming. And do you know, from time to time, I was reminded of a play I once wrote." Why was the play altered? 2 reasons have been advanced. One is that the 4-act text was too long for an evening at the theater, and so certain parts had to be sacrificed for the sake of performance time. The other theory is that George Alexander, who played the role of Jack in the original production, wanted to ensure that he had the starring role, so he cut everybody else's part to make sure that his was the most prominent. But whatever the reason, the story of The Importance of Being Earnest demonstrates the ways in which plays are fundamentally different from virtually every other art form, where no matter how talented the author, nor how brilliant the script, a play put into production is a collaborative effort. Actors, directors, producers, scene designers, and costumers all bring to the text their own interpretation, and the work does not become complete until they have done so. No one would ever think of taking the Mona Lisa and repainting her dress to bring her up to date, but when Joseph Papp's Shakespeare Festival recently produced The Taming of the Shrew, they set it in the American Old West with a black Petruchio, and critics were delighted. Last spring, the Louisiana School produced a 1970s rock musical adaptation of Two Gentlemen of Verona. In the Louisiana School production, not only were a number of songs and scenes from the adapted script eliminated, but I myself was asked to write additional Shakespearean dialogue in iambic pentameter, and I was thus given the unique opportunity to be William Shakespeare's co-author. Experimentation still occurs with The Importance of Being Earnest, as shown, for example, by several productions in the last decade in which directors have elected to have Lady Bracknell played by a man in drag. If there is no denying the social and collaborative nature of theatrical production, there are sometimes opportunities for recovering lost bits of original text. The following scene appeared in Wilde's manuscript, but was eliminated from the first production and from nearly all subsequent editions and productions of the play. The scene concerns Algernon and a solicitor named Mr. Grimsby. In this scene, Algy, who is impersonating Ernest, is confronted by Grimsby concerning activity perpetrated by Jack when he was pretending to be Ernest.
Mr. Ernest Worthing
Yes, that is my name.
of B4 the Albany.
Yes, that is my address. Charming rooms, too.
I'm terribly sorry, sir, but I have a writ of attachment against you at the suite of the Savoy Hotel Limited for £762, 14 and 2.
Against me.
Yes, sir.
What's perfect nonsense. I never dine at the Savoy at my own expense. I always dine at Louis. Far more expensive. I don't owe a penny to the Savoy.
But see, the writ is marked as having you personally at the Albany on May the 27th. Judgment was handed down against you by default on June the 5th. Since then, we have attempted to contact you no less than 13 times without receiving any reply. In the interest of our other clients, we were forced to obtain an order for committal of your person.
Committal? What on earth do you mean by committal? Having the slightest intention of going away. I'm stopping here for a week. I'm staying with my brother. If you think I'm going back up to town the moment I arrive here in the country, you are extremely mistaken.
I am merely a solicitor myself, the officer of the court whose duty it is to obtain the person of the debtor is waiting in the fly outside. He has considerable experience in these matters, if you know. But you would no doubt prefer to pay the bill.
Pay it? How on earth do you expect me to do that? You don't suppose I've got any money, do you? No gentleman ever has any money.
It's my experience that it's usually relations who pay. I'm terribly sorry to burst in on this interesting family discussion, but time presses. We must be at Holloway no later than 5 o'clock in order to obtain admission.
Holloway?
The rules are very strict.
Holloway?
Yes, sir. It is at Holloway that detention of this kind always takes place.
Well, I really am not going to be imprisoned in the suburbs, having dined in the West End. It's perfectly ridiculous. Nonsensical laws there are anyway.
It's true that the surroundings of Holloway are middle class. Reside myself there. Reside myself there in the vicinity. But the jail is middle. The jail is middle class and well fashionable. There's plenty of air, and there are ample opportunities for obtaining exercise at certain stated hours of the day.
Exercise? Good heavens, man, no gentleman ever takes exercise. You don't seem to understand what a gentleman is.
No, sir, I don't think I don't. There's so many different varieties. Result of cultivation in the town. Could you come quietly, sir, if it would not be too inconvenient for you?
Is the act of telling a lie. For as it has been noted, the lie that is Ernest Worthing, like Frankenstein's monster, soon takes on a life of its own and is utterly out of the control of its creator. This is a point made much more strongly in the 4-act version of the play, due largely to the Grimsby scene. The Grimsby scene is the only scene of the 4-act text that is entirely omitted from the 3-act version, but nearly every other scene of the play was altered during the rehearsal process. You will now see the end of the argument between Cecily and Gwendolen that we began some time ago. The basic structure of what you are about to see is present in both versions of the play, but the 4-act version, which is what you will now see, is somewhat stronger than the version with which most people are familiar. Please remember that at this point in the play, Cecily and Gwendolen have just discovered that both of them are engaged to someone named Ernest Worthing. And although by now you know this is a play about mistaken identity, and although you're used to seeing the actors in more than one role, I should point out that Teresa Hines, whom you last saw playing Gwendolen, will now be playing Cecily, and Jennifer Bernard, whom you last saw playing Cecily, will now be playing Gwendolen.
will the rule mine. Personally, I cannot understand how anybody manages to resist in the country. If anybody who is anybody does. The country always bores me to death.
That's what the newspapers call agricultural depression, is it not? I believe the aristocracy are suffering very greatly from it at present. It is almost an epidemic amongst them, I've been told. Would you like some tea, Miss Fairfax?
Thank you. Detestable girl, but I require tea.
Sugar?
No, thank you. Sugar is not fashionable.
Cake or bread and butter?
Bread and butter, please. Cake is rarely seen at the best houses nowadays.
My dear.
You have filled my tea with lumps of sugar. And though I asked most distinctly for bread and butter, you have given me cake. I am known for the gentleness of my disposition and the extraordinary sweetness of my nature. But I warn you, Miss Pordew, you may go too far.
To save my innocent, trusting boy from the machinations of any other girl, there are no lengths to which I would not go.
From the moment I saw you, I distrusted you. I felt that you were false and deceitful. I am never deceived in such matters. My impressions of people are invariably right.
It seems to me, Miss Fairfax, that I'm trespassing on your valuable time. No doubt you have many other calls of a similar character to make in the neighborhood. Good day.
Good day.
By style, and one in which identity depends upon the way one is perceived by society at large. The play also presents a world which is very hopeful, for the act of wishing a thing very often results in its coming true. Remember that Jack wished to become Ernest, and at the end of the play he discovers that because he was named after his father, he has really been Ernest all along. But his father's full name, and thence his own, is Ernest John Moncrief. As Gwendolyn notes early in the play, Jack is a nickname for John. So Jack has been both Ernest and himself. One is most earnest when one is oneself, and in the importance of being earnest, one achieves happiness by dreaming it and wishing it into existence. You will see this process at work in the final scene we will present this evening, in which Algernon, masquerading as Ernest, falls in love with Cecily.
We were saying off next week at the same hour.
I don't care about Jack. I don't care about anybody in the whole world but you. I love you, Cecily. We'll marry people.
You silly boy, of course. Well, we've been engaged for the last 3 months.
For the last 3 months.
Yes, 3 months, all but a few days. It'll be exactly 3 months on Thursday.
But I didn't know anything about it.
Few people nowadays ever do realize the position in which they are placed. The age of Miss Prism has often remarked to me as a peculiarly thoughtless one.
But how did we become engaged?
Well, ever since dear Uncle Jack first confessed to it, that he had a younger brother who was very good. You naturally formed the chief topic of conversation between myself and Miss Prism. And a man who is so much talked about is very attractive. One feels there must be something in it after all. I dare say. It was foolish of me, but I fell in love with you, Ernest.
Darling, and when did we become actually engaged?
On the 14th of April last, worn out by your entire ignorance of my existence, I determined to end the matter one way or another. And after a long struggle with myself, I accepted you in the garden. The next day, I bought this little ring in your name. You see, I always wear it, and though it shows you a sadly extravagant, I have long never believed in that. Here, in this box, is where I keep all your dear presents you've given me from time to time, neatly numbered and labeled. That's the
pearl necklace you gave me for my birthday. And over here in this corner is where I keep all your dear letters.
My letters? But my own sweet Cecily, I've never written you any letters.
I wrote the letters for you and had them posted to me in the village by my maid. I wrote 3 times a week and sometimes often.
My own.
My own dear Ernest.